From the Quixel toolbar, we want to start up D2 by clicking on the D button here. And this is going to open up the base creator window. So we can click and drag from the bottom here just to expand this out. And you can see the different types of input maps that we can assign here. And we can also input the mesh. So let's go ahead and do that. So click on the mesh button. And you want to go find your OBJ that you just exported. So I'm going to go to the texture directory and choose my selena.obj and hit the open button. So when you load the mesh in, you can see that there's the mesh button, and then there's two different things here. There's body and head. So if you remember in 3ds Max, we set this up to have two parts, so the head and then the body. And now that we've exported this into D2, you can actually see these two objects are represented right here. So you need to make sure that the correct layer here is selected. So I'm going to choose body to begin with. And the first thing we need to do is plug in our color ID maps that we just made. So click on the ID map button. And we want to choose the body color ID. So make sure that you're choosing the body color ID here. And you should see it load up. Now, the very powerful thing about this is you can actually choose to link these color IDs to specific materials. So if you go ahead and click on the link button here, and I want to just choose random, so I'm going to choose the skin texture here. So in the ID editor here, just click and you'll see this little drop down menu appear. And we want to go to human and then up to skin. So what that's going to do is link this yellow color to a skin material type. So in the head, when we go through and link up this ID, it's going to have this exact same yellow color, and it's going to automatically apply this skin material type here. And you can see here, this is already automatically given this a default skin material. And if you want, you can actually go through and link up all of your IDs, but this is totally unnecessary. Just link the skin so you can see what's going on, and I'm going to hit the done button. So let's go through and plug in the rest of our materials here for the body. So I want to choose normal map, and I'm going to go to my textures here and choose the body normal map here. So next I'm going to plug in a ambient occlusion map here. Now if you don't have an ambient occlusion map, we can do this quickly and press the undo button here. And you just want to go to your textures and open up both of your normal maps here. So I've got Selena body normal map, Selena head normal map, press enter. And back in undo, what we can do here is choose this drop down menu, go to map converter, and we can change this normal to ambient occlusion here and press the active dock button here. You'll need to go through and just tweak these settings really quickly. Make sure that you're not getting too many shadows, but some of the detail is definitely appearing. So we definitely want finer shadows on the face and not so much on the body. Okay, so now that I've tweaked these three sliders here, you just want to go ahead and save this document as your ambient occlusion in your textures folder. And we want to choose the body normal map now. And using the map converter, we want to convert the body into an ambient occlusion here. And the same thing again. You just want to go through, make sure that all these settings are correct, and everything looks good. You don't want too many large shadows or medium shadows. You generally want the fine shadows to be the highest value here. And you'll want to go ahead and just save this out as your ambient occlusion for the body in your textures folder. So once that's done, I'm just going to close all of these. Don't need to save any of those, and I can just close undo here. Now back into D2, we can plug in the ambient occlusion maps. So I've got the body ambient occlusion here. We don't need to worry about object space normals, but if you know how to bake them out in 3ds Max, they're actually quite useful for this. And the last thing we need to do is include the albedo base map. So this is the diffuse texture. So I'm going to choose the Selena body diffuse texture and plug that into the albedo base map. We also want to use a specular base map. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my specular base for the body. Now, once we've done this, we need to go to the head and follow through the same process again. So because this is two different objects using two different textures, it needs different IDs, it needs different normals, and so on and so on. So you want to go ahead and choose the head layer and go through and plug in all of your maps again. Now if I click on the ID links for the head now, and you can see here, because we set the yellow color here to be the skin tone, you can actually see here it's automatically set this yellow to have a generic skin texture on it. So yeah, this is one of the powerful things about using the Quixel suite, is you can actually go through and set up a lot of large objects really quickly by using the ID links. So I'm just going to go through here and just quickly plug in all of my textures for the head objects. Okay, so I've got the objects for the body and the head all set up now, and you should be only using 5 textures for this, but as I said before, if you know how to bake object space normals, go ahead and do that. So the next thing we need to do is take a look at some of these other options down here, and you can see here the calibration profile. For me, this is currently set to UDK. This might be set to toolbag or possibly PBR for you. So you want to just go ahead and click this drop down menu, set this to UDK, and this is going to calibrate all of our maps and materials to this game engine. So you've got a lot of different options here depending on what you're exporting to, and obviously you can choose UDK. If you've got UE4, you can plug that in too, but for this demonstration we want to use UDK. And I want to open up the options here by clicking on the expand arrow. Now there's a couple of simple options here. So the first one is the texel density, and this is just the overall resolution. I'm going to keep this at 1024. The work resolution is 100%. Now this is a good way to avoid long processing times if you have a slower computer. So you can actually turn this down to 50% and you won't actually lose any quality for the final export, but your working preview resolution is going to be at 50%. So I'm just going to keep this at 100%. And for UDK, we need to keep flip normal Y, so that should be turned on using the UDK profile. Create base layers. Now, if you don't link any of your IDs, if you remember we linked the skin ID, turning on create base layers is actually going to automatically give every single color its own base layer. I tend to keep this turned off. So 16-bit materials and the metalness options we keep turned off, we won't be using those. Quality curvature we can keep turned on, and seam termination, you can keep this turned on. So the next thing we want to do is set the output path. So you want to go ahead and make sure that this is set to your working directory, so the same location where all of your materials and maps are. So the last step to do is create base. So you want to pause the video here while the base is being created, because this can actually take a couple of minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and click on create base and skip to the end. Okay, so the base creator has finished doing its thing and it's successfully created the project. I'm going to hit OK. Now you'll notice the D2 window has actually changed a little bit here. You can see up in the top tabs you got the body and the head, and if you switch between these you can actually see the PSDs in the background. And we also have another row of tabs up the top here, so the albedo, which is our diffuse texture. We have the ambient occlusion. We have the gloss map, we have the normal map, and we have the specular map. Now you can see here all of these PSDs are corresponding to these different map types here, so you should have a lot of stuff open up here, but you can navigate through those using these tabs up the top here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the body to begin with. I'm going to come up to the Quixel toolbar and turn 3Do on, and we can take a preview of our model with all the current maps applied to it. Now you'll probably notice that the skin tone is looking a bit strange, and this is because we linked up the default skin type to the model, and don't worry about that, we can change how the skin tone looks completely. But you can see here we got our model in PBR and it's properly lit. You will notice however that it's very shiny, but don't worry too much about that, it's just assigning default specular values to the entire model, and we're going to go through and change all of those settings. So Now if you quickly just rotate your lighting solution by holding down shift and left clicking, you can actually move the shadows just a little bit and you can change the location of the light. I'm going to go with something like this. This is a nice forward shot and it's got a good mix of light and shadow. So I'm just going to move this over to the side for the moment. Let's resize this a little bit here. Okay, so I've got my preview window set up here, and let's go back to the D2 window now, and we can see here we have the texture base and we have the skin. So that's that material that we linked at the start. So for this, I want to just get rid of the skin material because we're going to be setting up something manually later. So I'm going to choose the skin material here, and I want to click on the delete selected icon here. And you'll see everything changes and it should update shortly. And we just need to do the same thing to the head. And there we go. So I'm going to switch back to the body again. Now the reason why we spent a couple of minutes setting up the color IDs is if you go to the 3D window and hold down the C key, you should actually see your color IDs appearing. So this is what we set up in Max, and you can see now in 3D these are all appearing. Now this is a great way to assign textures. It's a great way to control the locations of textures. So the first thing we want to do, I'm just going to zoom in a bit by using the mouse scroll and holding down C. I want to press C and shift at the same time, and I want to click on the pants, so this bright green color here. And you should see it do nothing for a moment or two until this window pops up. Now this is the material browser. This is basically all the different material presets that you can use on your model. You can see here there's a long list of stuff here. It's actually quite enormous and it's well worth checking out everything in here. There's a lot of fantastic materials in here, and we're just going to go with something quite simple to begin with. So there's a couple of ways to navigate this. You can either go through and browse everything. You have the option to type in a search up here. So if you're looking for, say, a fabric, you can do that. But what we're doing is we're going to go down to the fabric menu just here, and we want to choose I'm going to go with an old dark denim texture here. Now if I just choose this old dark denim, its preview should pop up just here, and you can see this is a fairly simplistic base texture. All it has is just a little bit of highlighting and just a very simplistic denim kind of texture. Now because I pressed C and shift and assigned a brand new material, when I press the create button, it's going to assign that old denim material to the pants, as you can see here. So this is the power of using the color IDs, and you can see here in the albedo texture in Photoshop that it's actually applied this material to the pants that we ID'd out. So you can see there all the green IDs are assigned to this material type here. And if we take a look at the D2 window, you can see over here we have the old dark denim, and you can see here it's assigned to the green selection. Now we can go through and define all these if we want to, but there's really no need for this project. So let's take a look at this denim layer that we just created. Now there's a couple of things here. So we have the enter group option. We'll go into that in a second. We have a mask, which is masked to that green ID. Of course we have the green ID just here, and of course we have a couple of basic layer options just here. So let's go into this group of materials here by clicking on the enter group icon, which is the folder icon. And I'm just going to drag this down a little bit here. So each of these layers have three options: the material, which can be a texture or just left blank; the mask, which determines where this layer appears on the model itself; and finally the reflectance, which is the base color of the material. So let's begin with looking at the material here, and if you click on the material icon, and I'm going to switch out this texture on the fly, so I want to just go down and change this jean texture, which you can see here in 3D, and I'm going to replace this with, let's say a ballistic nylon, and press the switch button. And you'll notice in 3D that this updates automatically. All the reflectance and specular values have changed, as well as the normals as well. So this has completely switched out this denim texture for this ballistic nylon here, This is a really quick and powerful way of trying out different textures and trying out different material types. So while the nylon does look pretty awesome, I'm just going to switch back to the jeans again. So click on the material icon, click on jeans, switch back. And you can see now when I switch back, this is going to go back to all the jeans settings as before. So next, we're going to look at the masking options. And when you click on the mask icon, it's going to open up the Dynamask editor. Now, this is a great way to change how your material looks on the model. And there's a lot of different presets in here, which we're going to be working with on this project. So I'm not going to go into detail with this for now. We're going to be covering this a lot later. So I'm just going to close this window now. And lastly, we have the reflectance button. So if I click on the reflectance and I change the color value from this grayish blue color to just say a solid blue, you can see the PSD is updating. And when I hit OK, it's actually going to update this texture in the window here. This is just a quick way to change and tweak any of the colors of your layers. So I'm going to click on the reflectance again, change it back to a bluey gray. The next thing to look at is the sliders and options down the bottom. We have scale, texture intensity, and opacity, as well as some various blending options here. Now, if we have the denim material active, I can change the scaling of this denim texture here by turning down this slider here. So I'm going to set the scale to -1, and that's going to halve the size of this texture here. Now you can see this is a much more finer texture, and it actually matches the scale of the model itself a bit better. The texture intensity slider will determine how sharp a texture appears in the material. So if I turn this up to 100, you can see the sharpness of the material is quite stark now. And I'll just drop this back down to 40. And the opacity will make the texture more or less transparent. Now, depending on which layer that you have selected, determines which slider affects which material here. Now, there are several blending options to choose from here for the entire material and the individual layer, but I'm going to go into these in detail later on in the video, so I'm going to keep these as default for now. But if you're familiar with Photoshop blending modes, these will be very straightforward for you. Next, we have a row of buttons at the bottom of the window, which gives you the option to add in new materials and basic layer functionality. So let's go ahead and add in a brand new clean layer, so this middle page icon here. Now, just like Photoshop, you can click and drag these layers to organize them. I'm going to click and drag this brand new color fill layer to the top. So what I want to do here is add a bit of damage to this denim material. So the first thing I want to do is go to this color fill layer that we just added in. I want to choose the reflectance, and I want to just set this to a darker color, so somewhere near black, and just hit OK. So I want to limit this effect to certain parts of the texture. So back in the layers, I want to click on the mask icon for the new color fill that we just added and open up the Dynamask editor. Now scroll down the masks until you find the sand and dirt masks down here, and we want to choose the sandy dirt. And you can see here this is really limiting this effect to very specific areas. So I'm just going to rotate the light around just a little bit so I can see what's going on here. So let's take a look and see what this new mask has done. Now if I move this window out of the way, you can see there's a PSD here called body_mask, and this is the mask for the entire body, but because we're working with a specific material ID, which is the green pants, this effect is going to be limited specifically to this area only, and we're not going to see this on any other parts of the model unless we create a brand new material type which is applied to the entire body. So because we limited this effect to just the pants, we can do some independent tweaking here. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit closer now, and just hold down shift and just rotate the light so I can see the different types of specular. And what we want to do now is take a look at the Dynamask editor. Now if you don't have these options here on the side, there should be a little button up in the top right corner which has more and 2 arrows which you can toggle the advanced options. Now for the sandy dirt preset, we have a combination of 4 different effects here which are creating this final mask. Now if we take a look at the first one, we have the texture. Now this is going to contribute a different set of values to the mask in the background that you can see here, which is going to make more or less a fairly subtle change. But if I turn it all the way up, and if you watch in the 3D window here, you should see a little bit of a change going on here. Now the texture doesn't affect it too much, it just adds a certain volume of noise to the mask, and the same goes for the secondary mask. And at any time you can actually swap these materials out, as we can see here. And we can say I'm going to go for a classic uniform. And you can see now that texture is combining into the mask, which is creating this color fill here. And you can see now how this texture is combining this color fill into this mask, and it's limiting this effect to very specific parts of this model. So I'm just going to go ahead and switch back to the standard beach texture that was applied before. Now you do have a couple of sliders here which you can change and achieve different effects with this texture, but for the moment I'm going to show you the ambient occlusion and the curvature. So let's open up the curvature, and I'm going to scroll down and take a look at the brightness and contrast. So I'm going to turn the contrast all the way up, and you can see this is cutting down the effect because it's introducing a lot of black into this mask. So that means it's removing all the textures, and if we take a look in 3D, you can see it's very limited now. So the lower we can reduce this number, the better. And this is going to spread this effect a bit further. And you can see now we're getting a lot more dispersion of this pattern throughout this entire mask. And we can also change the brightness value here. This is going to increase the blacks. And you can see again, it's going to cut down on the masking here. And I would want to just reduce this a little bit. And you can see now how this is affecting the entirety of this mask. So I want to keep the values to roughly where they were before, and just slowly pull it up until I get the results that I want. Now, because it's a denim material, it's probably going to stain before it starts to scratch. So we can see here we're getting a little bit of scratching up here around the pockets, which isn't too bad. So I'm going to turn the brightness up just a little bit more. That's probably a little bit too much, so somewhere around 55 is working pretty well. We're getting that subtle change in tone, where it looks like it's been stained, or maybe she's been running around and gotten a bit of dirt on her. So let's close the curvature. So with this preset, we're not going to be getting a lot of changes with the ambient occlusion, because most of the masking detail is contained within the two textures here, and then controlled overall by the curvature. So I'm going to hit done, and just apply this mask to this color fill. So now that I've made some damage, let's make some highlights and shading. So come back to your D2 window and click on the Add Clean layer. And let's add ourselves in a brand new layer. Now I want to turn the reflectance color to something a bit just above fairly dark grey, and just hit OK. Now that's looking good. And we can go to the masking options now and open up the Dynamask. Now instead of using a damage style preset, let's use one of the cavity types or one of the edge types. So to begin with, let's try the edges. And you can see here this is creating a lot of masking over the edges of this model based on the normal maps. So if I move the Dynamask window out of the way, and you can see how this is affecting the texture and how this has been masked now. So what we need to do now is change a few of these values here. So I'm going to go to the curvature. I'm not going to play with any of these top settings. I just want to tweak the contrast just a little bit and make it a little bit stronger. So let's say somewhere around 20 is good. Now this is going to make the effect a bit more pronounced. We can see it looks like a bit more of wear and tear, especially around the knees, around the pockets as well, and just places where you'd expect to see a bit more wear and tear going on. Now you don't want to spend time trying to blend in the mask into the material, so I'm going to hit done, and we're going to fix this up in the material layer. So we can change the blending mode of this layer from this drop down menu here, and let's go with a screen to begin with. Now this is going to brighten things up quite a bit, but we can tweak the opacity here to get a bit more of a subtle blend. So we're not losing any of the underlaying detail, like especially with the normal maps, and it's not getting that solid color, but we're still getting some pretty nice highlighting going on here. And this is a bit too bright, so I'm going to tweak the opacity down a bit more. That's looking a bit better. Okay, so let's add another clean layer and change our reflectance value to something quite dark. So let's make some shading in the recesses and the folds of this cloth. Now I've got my dark color here. Let's open up the Dynamask editor. Now instead of edges, let's go with either cavity or curvature. We'll see what cavities produce first. And that's a good result, so I'm going to stick with this. Now you can go through and change any of these values here, and you can tweak all of these to your heart's content to get the results that you want. But I'm pretty happy with just the default setting here now, so I'm going to hit done. And I want to tweak the opacity just a little bit here, just so it's not too dark and we're not getting too many deep shadows here. I'll turn this down just a little bit more. There we go. So the effect is pretty subtle, but compared to the original, so if I turn off all these brand new layers that we just made, we went from a fairly simplistic base texture, which was just a denim material with a little bit of built-in highlighting, and we added some damage in. We added some highlights, and lastly we added some shading in. It's always important not to go too far with these effects. I would actually probably tweak down the damage just a little bit more, maybe add some color in. So I'd reduce the opacity just a little bit, just so we're getting a better blending effect going on here, while you can still see the damage is obvious from a reasonable distance. So now that we've finished with the pants, let's go back to the Dido window and we click on the All button, and this will return us back to the main layer group. So we have our old dark denim material here. So next up, let's try the cotton shirt. So I'm going to hold down C and Shift and then click on the shirt here. Now I want to add in a semi pre-built material for the shirt because I want a cotton effect on this. So in the material browser, in the search bar, I'm going to type in cotton. So we have a couple of results for the cotton. Now for this one I want to go with the basic cotton and just build on this effect here. So we're doing the same thing that we did with the pants, which is take a simplistic effect and a simple texture with a bit of highlighting and build on top of it. So with the cotton selected, I'm going to hit create and we're going to enter our processing mode. Now you'll notice that certain materials take a little bit longer to build, especially ones that are more complex. Now if we go into the cotton group here, you can actually see instead of 2 materials, we now have 4 materials. And this has produced some pretty good results, but I want to make it match up with the pants a bit more. Now we need to go back and edit a lot of these specular values later on, and especially on the pants I think they're a bit too shiny. But we'll get back to that later. So for the moment we're just going to go through the workflow of adding some textures, tweaking them, and you just go back over everything you've done and start to refine it. You don't try to get things perfect the first time around. It's just a process of refinement and just making sure the overall appearance of the character is looking good. So with the cotton, let's just get it a bit closer here. So the first thing I want to do is just reduce the scaling of the base texture. So I'm going to drop this down by 1. And we should have a bit more of a broken effect here, which is exactly what I want. Now the cavity dirt is just going to include a little bit of damage in between parts, and of course edge wear and the dirty speck, which is the specular values. We can see here it's sort of changing to a slightly brownish color. But what we need to do now is add in a few more layers like we did for the pants, which is the highlights and shading. You can see there's some here in the PSD already. So let's create a brand new clean layer. And let's pick a darker grey. Now let's open up the Dynamask editor. And let's go with the cavities option, and we'll see what kind of results we get here. Now this is good, it's going into the recesses of the cloth and we're getting some nice detail down here. So let's hit done. Now as always, we don't want to go too far with the shading and highlights, so I'm going to tweak the opacity here. And I think about 70% should do it, and that should give us some nice good effect here. Now let's add another clean layer in. Change the reflectance color. Now we want to go a little bit bright here, so we're going to push this up fairly close to white. And back to our Dynamask. And let's change this to the edges. So I'm going to choose the edges option here. Now while this is active, I have the edges on and I can see the preview of the mask in the background in Photoshop. But if I wanted to see this mask on the model as I'm working on it, I can choose this button just here, which is the quick preview button, and just press that one. Now I can actually see the mask in 3D, which is an awesome way to work. Now, this makes it a lot more visual with how things are going to be distributed across your model and where exactly they're going to be distributed. So in this case I'm pretty happy, so I'm going to turn off quick preview. And just hit OK. Now, one of the things I'm noticing is, especially in the wider areas, I'm getting a bit of loss of texture behind this color here. So I'm going to change the blending mode down to a soft light. And we should get a bit more blending behind, which is good. Okay, so I'm finished with the shirt now. So I'm going to go back up to all and back to our main layer group here. Now let's hold down C and Shift, and we're going to choose the skin tone. Now, as you might remember from before, we applied a default skin tone and it wasn't particularly good. So if you come down to the organic group down here in the material browser, we have a couple of different options here for the skin types. So we have a couple of wilder ones like alien skin, we have monster skins, of course, which is awesome, the raptor skin, and we have damaged skin and inflamed skin. Now the preset that we used before was the default skin type, so I think this is probably a good place to start, but we need to tweak this fairly extensively. So I'm going to choose the skin type, hit create, and let Dido do its thing. Now you can see here from the loading menu that it's creating 8 different materials, and it might take a little bit longer than usual. And there we go, we got the skin applied. So this is already producing pretty good results. This is a little bit better than what we got from the default one. So the first thing we need to do is go into the group for the skin material and just pull this window down a bit further, and you can see here we've got a lot more materials in here. So the first thing I want to do is the skin texture. I want to just reduce the size again by -1, and hopefully we'll be getting a lot more finer detail here. Yep, that's looking good. Now we have the skin base. So the base color is going to combine with all of these other layers here, so we might get fairly varied results, but we can lighten or darken the skin tone as we want. Now I'm just going to go for something just a little bit desaturated. There we go. Now we're getting pretty good results here. I'm liking a lot of the detail that's going on. Now, of course, the specular values are still a bit too bright, it's a bit too plasticky, and we will change these, but I'm going to continue on with applying materials first, and then once we apply all the materials, we're going to go over each of the submaps and just tweak what we can.